A little sound check really quick as I'm starting this because I'm not doing any intro, no music, anything. I just want to make sure that the sound is coming through. Do a little update right here really quick and a little inspiration as to what I'm talking about today. Where did I come from with this one? Let me see here. Let me turn this up, see if I can hear myself. And yep, absolutely. So good to go. All right. So I was just on a space. Well, I shouldn't even say I was on the space. I was listening to the space. I was in the audience, and it was talking about Bitcoin treasury companies and ETH treasury companies. And I commented in there, and I ended up retweeting it. So if you check out the last tweet that I put out, or I guess you'd say last post that I reposted, whatever, it is directly related to these treasury companies. And I was like, you know what? Let me just do an extended take because I didn't ask to go up on the stage. I didn't raise my hand, whatever, try to get into the conversation. But I do have some thoughts. I put out the tweet. I was like, you know what? Might need a little bit more clarification. Let's get into it. So one of the hottest topics right now is all of these treasury companies. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole argument of paper Bitcoin, paper ETH, and all this stuff, and bringing back the old legacy system and muddying the waters and all that stuff. No, that's not what I'm going in this one. The conversation was specifically about treasury companies. So this is neither yay or nay, whatever opinion you want to form on that. I'm not here to persuade you otherwise, but when it comes to these particular two things, right? So you have these Bitcoin treasury companies, of course, MicroStrategy and all the copycats. I shouldn't even say copycats because he's actively recruiting other companies to adopt his playbook. So it is what it is. There's that whole army of Bitcoin treasury companies. And then on the other hand, we have the pop-ups with Tommy Lee and all these others that are doing these ETH treasury companies. So what exactly is going on? What's the difference is so forth. So the analogy that I gave in that post is basically like they're not really comparing apples to apples, oranges to oranges, because at the end of the day, again, let's get to the underlying asset, which is Bitcoin and ETH. They're not apples to apples, oranges to oranges. Not going to explain the whole ethos of Bitcoin. Go look that up. Read the white paper. Bitcoin is money, point blank. That's what it is, right? ETH, on the other hand, it is I guess you'd say a global decentralized computing system, and it's a completely different thing. So one is money, one is a computing system, and the gas token that is on both of them is, of course, Bitcoin for the native Bitcoin token, and then on ETH, it's Ether or ETH. Everyone calls it Ethereum anyways, but so they're two very different things. They don't even equal out. So trying to compare what's better, a Bitcoin treasury company, what's better, an ETH treasury company, what's better, Bitcoin or ETH. It's like it again, apples to apples. Let's keep these things a little bit more. It's a better comparison to say what's better, owning Bitcoin or a Bitcoin treasury company. Obviously, anyone that's in the space is going to say Bitcoin. Again, wherever your convictions are on that one, you know, depending who you are and all this stuff, your ETFs, your sovereign wealth fund, a pension, whatever it is, you're going to make a case for the one that you like better. But the hardcore people that are in it, that's what they're going to say. Same thing on the other side. So it's easier to compare now the underlying asset with the derivative of it. Now that's an apples to apples, oranges to oranges comparison. But when you're crossing these over now, it's the same thing as trying to compare these two tokens, right? So explain the difference between the two. So again, they're not a perfect comparison, but let's just say what these treasury companies are like. Now, when we're going to the underlying asset, why these things have value, and there's so much hoopla and all of that, they basically have the same underlying value as far as the treasury company itself. Certain companies that cannot buy crypto can buy into these treasury companies, and they can raise money in unique ways. It's just very different. Okay, yes, that's what these treasury companies can do. That is different than buying these underlying tokens itself, and I understand the case for that. Now, in the case of a Bitcoin treasury company, the analogy that I gave, it's like a speculative real estate investor that's buying up a whole bunch of undeveloped land in 2007. Everything's going up. Everyone's making money. Doesn't matter what it is. You buy this undeveloped land because you know, in theory, down the line, it's going to have more value as more people start to build houses and so forth. So that farmland is not producing apples like it once did. Apples aren't in demand, and it's not as profitable to be a farmer. You buy up this undeveloped land, and then you're going to sell it to a real estate developer that's going to cut it up, parcel it, and sell it because everyone's getting loans, all that stuff. And in many ways, that is like the Bitcoin treasury company. Now, why is that analogy, I think, a good one? It's because undeveloped land does not generate any income. Same thing as Bitcoin itself. Bitcoin is not a income generating asset. It is digital money. It is cash, right? So again, whichever camp you fall into, like there's a whole bunch of Bitcoin factions and all this stuff. I'm not telling you to cross over, but generally speaking, no, not generally speaking, definitely speaking, Bitcoin is not an income generating asset. You can say it's cash, it stores value, it does whatever. It's not the same thing as owning a stock. It is not the same thing as starting a company. It is not the same thing as getting a job, right? It's just, it's not generating income, right? So now all of these derivatives and different plays on how to stake it in this on a centralized exchange and all these things, they're trying to solve that problems because it doesn't generate any money. So buying undeveloped land, speculating on its value is similar to that. Now, in the case of these Bitcoin treasury companies, their whole play is to never, ever, ever sell. And they're just going to keep borrowing, diluting the value of their shareholders. And then they know that the value of Bitcoin is outpacing the rate at which they're paying back the money that they're borrowing. Okay, cool. But at the end of the day, you still have the problem. Where's the income that's being generated? How is this sustainable long term? And that's why I say it is like speculating on real estate in 2007, undeveloped land. Now, over on the ETH treasury companies, now this is a little bit more interesting system because what happens is, like I said, ETH is not comparable to digital money, which is Bitcoin. They're just not the same. So the better analogy for what ETH is, people are trying to understand what is the underlying value of ETH. Why is ETH like a thing? It's just think of it as the gas that goes in your truck. Well, if you want to move things from point A to point B, the gas that's in your truck or your vehicle, whatever that is you're driving, it has value. It's because it's going to get you from point A to point B, right? Speculating on the value of the gasoline, yes, people do it. Southwest, when I was in school, I mean, that was their famous thing. They speculated on the value of jet fuel by pre-ordering a whole bunch of it with futures contracts. So when gas went absolutely crazy, they were able to then give cheaper flights and everything because they had booked all of their profits, or I should say all of their purchases for this jet fuel way in advance. So they were paying very low prices when the rest of the industry was paying high prices. Now, their generating model, their income generating model is flying people around, right? So going back to ETH, so you don't lose this analogy that I'm making right here. If you're building an airplane company, you're building an airline company on ETH, well, getting people from point A to point B is the business model, right? So to do that, you're going to need the jet fuel, which is ether, right? That is the fuel that runs everything, getting you from point A to point B. So in the case of these treasury companies now, they're actually investing in something that has a potential to be an income generating asset. Like, how do you say that? Why do you say that? Because hate it or love it, staking is what is the difference between a proof of work Bitcoin system and a proof of stake Ethereum, which it switched over from proof of work, but Solana, and just the list goes on. All the proof of stakes, you can look that up. You might not know that already or whatever. Just ask ChatGPT or any of these AIs. What's the difference between proof of work, proof of stake? I'm not going to go down that right now. But with the proof of stake system now, these treasury companies can stake it. They can start their own validator nodes and all this different things, and they can actually generate between 3 and 5%, give or take, on the actual Ethereum that they're staking, the ETH that they're staking, right? So there is potential for income generation in the sense that they're staking the ETH, and this is all in the system, not using a centralized exchange and using all sorts of other gimmicks that you can do with Bitcoin, but it's completely different. They're staking it into this proof of stake system, and they're getting income on top of this. Now, so there's two ways that they're speculating on it. The price is going up. So just like how the price of those jet fuels and all that stuff is going up for Southwest, and then they're able to then, if they wanted to, sell off the fuel, or they could use it in whatever it is that they're actually producing. Well, these treasury companies, they're not producing anything. They're not building dApps. They're not using all this stuff to be used as fuel. So either A, they can sell it off and then get the profit that way. Either they can take out more loans and dilute it, just like what they're doing over on the Bitcoin treasury side. But because they're getting that 3 to 5% in excess, they can actually just sell off that or reinvest it, whatever it is, compound it. But either way, it's generating income. So there is a business model in which they are able to take off money. And that's the side, like, It does not connect. Like they're not even equal. Now, as far as do either of these systems make sense? Does speculation make people money? Yes, absolutely. Is it sustainable? Is it a wise decision? Now, if you ask me, would I put my money into one of these things? Would I park my money in a micro strategy or a treasury company of any caliber? No, absolutely not. I would not do that. Like, there is no way I'm going to put my net worth and park it in one of these treasury companies, because long term I don't think it's sustainable. Everyone thought real estate was sustainable and it was the way back in 2007, and everything came crashing down. I remember I was in school and I was coming out. The whole world was coming to an end. We were this close to the entire financial system as we know it being ruined. Why? Because nobody saw the end coming. Now, if you want to fast forward or rewind, go back even further. All right, so when I'm a kid, I'm just coming online, AOL, all that stuff. We went through the dot-com bubble. We saw that, right? All the speculation, people were speculating on companies that had no revenue. Just because they had .com on their name, okay, they're worth billions of dollars. We're throwing money at them, and cool. Then it all came crashing down. Then you have some survivors. You have the Yahoos, the Amazons, the eBays. Like, all these companies survived, but the vast majority of them, Pets.com, and so many of them just went belly up. They had billion-dollar valuations and zero revenue whatsoever, and it made no sense. And that's what I believe is going to happen with a lot of these treasury companies, in the sense that it's great now. Everyone's all excited and everyone's all like doing their high fives and forming cults on X and everywhere else. But it's once you get old enough and you see patterns, you see it happen over and over and over again. I was a kid when the 90s bubble happened. Then, of course, when the whole the whole Enron thing happens, right? So the Enron traders that were trading energy, doing all that craziness, they were actually hired up by all the banks. Now, just follow all this, go watch Enron, the smartest guys in the room and so forth. They were hired by all the banks. They learned how to do the exact same thing that they did with energy with Enron. They did it with mortgages. They did it with loans. And then those guys, they were all hired by the banks, right? So the same thing happened again. Whole bunch of speculation. The bubble popped. Everyone was like, oh my God, I can't believe this is ending. How does this happen? Nobody saw it coming. Well, here we go again. The last bull cycle, there was the whole NFT craze. Well, even before the NFT craze, there was the ICO craze, right? So within crypto, you have the ICOs. Everyone's coming out with their different coins that are supposed to be Bitcoin killers, all this stuff. Everyone thought it was the greatest thing ever. Infinite returns. DeFi's going crazy with 1,000,000% per day, like all this crazy stuff. And like an unemotional person standing from the outside could just look at this and say this is unsustainable. But when you're caught up in the herd and everyone's all like excited and the craziness is happening, then when it all comes crashing down, people are like, I didn't see that coming. I didn't see that coming. Again, see the patterns. It always happens over and over and over again. So then after that, there was the whole NFT thing. Same thing. Non-income generating assets trading around, like whatever. These JPEGs were going crazy, and I'm not knocking NFTs, love the technology and so forth, but same thing was happening there. That bubble came to a pop. Now we have all these treasury companies. It's like the same thing is happening again. It happens over and over and over. If history doesn't repeat itself, it sure as heck rhymes. It sounds very similar to what happened in the past, and it's happening again. And here we are with all these treasury companies. Everyone thinks Michael Saylor is the smartest thing since, I don't know, Jesus himself. He's out here preaching sermons about how Bitcoin is spiritual, and people are just coming to the altar of Bitcoin, and they're praising their hands. Like it's crazy out here. But if you step back and look, it's like, wait a minute, like how on earth is this sustainable? Like his entire business model, he has laid out, and he has told every single person he never intends to ever sell his Bitcoin, and he's just buying, borrowing, diluting. The playbook he has put out on multiple podcasts. He's been meeting with people all over, like everywhere. It's just buy, leverage, buy, leverage, sell kidneys, buy, leverage. It's not an income generating asset. So if you're going to lock it down, you're never going to move it. You're never going to sell it. The only way that it is going to make you any money is by, actually, no, it's not even making you money. You're just borrowing more against it and never intending to ever sell, so that there's actually no income generation. What's actually happening is that the value is appreciating, or you could say the dollar is depreciating. But either way, the value is appreciating, and you're just borrowing more and more and more and more money. There's no income generation process. There's no business model that is, it's not sustainable. It's absolutely not. You're just kicking the can down the road, and it's no different than what the U.S. government or any other government's doing down the road. You just borrow today to pay back yesterday's loan and kick it down for the next generation. Eventually, the system comes crumbling down. All of us that came into Bitcoin, all of this stuff, we know that, we observe that, we see that, and that's what's happening with these treasury companies. I know I get a lot of hate. The last time I put out something about MSTR, had this one guy saying, you have no idea what you're talking about. You said that these convertible bonds are absolutely dangerous, and Saylor himself said he will never use a convertible bond. Simply type in, does MSTR, does strategy use convertible bonds on Google? Put it into ChatGPT, Perplexity, put it into Copilot. I don't care what you use. He himself has said he uses them. But yet this guy came after me saying I'm trying to FUD. I have no horses in the race. I don't own any MSTR. But going back over to the ETH side now with Bitmain and all these other Ethereum treasury companies that are doing the same thing. Like, well, for one, I'll say the ETH side, those guys, funny enough, are more conservative than the Michael Saylors and the Bitcoin guys, right? So it's crazy. I can't believe that just even came out of my mouth. ETH guys are more conservative than Bitcoin guys. That just shows you where this whole system is, right? So you have Michael Saylor and the Bitcoin guys doing all this crazy leverage with their treasury companies. But on the other side, you have the Ethereum people kind of doing something very similar. But the one thing that they do have in their favor is if they're staking it and getting their own nodes and so forth, being validators, they're generating on top of it. So it is not much, 3 to 5, maybe a little bit more if they decide to sell that off or whatever it is. Like, at least the asset itself is generating income. Now, you could say that is not really generating income. All it is inflation as more tokens are coming into the system. But then there is burn on the network and so forth. And I'm not going to get into all the tokenomics of Ethereum and how it actually is a deflationary asset at this point. It does have an unlimited supply in theory. Well, not in theory, the way it's coded, it has an unlimited supply. But the way it is operating right now, it's actually burning more than it is creating. So it is by definition deflationary. So you could have that argument to say, well, until Bitcoin hits that 21 million cap, it is technically inflationary, right? At least the supply is. But again, I'm not going to go into all that stuff. Like, whatever. I like Bitcoin. They're just, it's just two very different systems. They don't compare to each other. But going back to my initial analogy of this whole thing, right? People that want to be in the airline business need to have that fuel. And that's what Ether is. Now, people that are storing value and they're using digital cash, that is Bitcoin. If you read the white paper, the native currency of the internet is basically what they were trying to build, and they did that, right? They solved the double spend problem. Very, very different proposition, very different problem than a decentralized computing system, which is the EVM, Ethereum Virtual Machine, and all these different things. And all these other competitors have popped up. But all I'm saying is these two things are not comparable. But when you actually get down to now to the treasury companies, they're more similar on the treasury side, but at the end of the day, I would say the ETH one makes a lot more sense than the Bitcoin one. I prefer Bitcoin as an asset over ETH. However, when it comes to the treasury companies, I prefer the ETH treasury companies because they have the potential to generate income without doing some crazy stuff while still keeping it in the system. Like, they could stake it. On the other hand, the only way for a Bitcoin treasury company to be an income generating entity is really to sell merchandise and speaking engagements, which when we're talking about billions of dollars, that's not going to move the needle. That it's just the amount of money that's invested into the Bitcoin. If you have no intention of ever selling it, it's like, how are those investors ever going to get their capital back? Just the appreciation. They're going to sell those stocks when they want to cash out, because at the end of the day, it's not income generating. It's not kicking off, I guess you would say, dividends and so forth. Now you have some ETFs that are doing that. They're trading it and then they're leveraging it and they're shorting it when it goes down and all sorts of things, and they're generating the income. But that is more so whoever's running that fund, the activity that they're doing, that's what's generating the income. They're trading and then splitting the profits is basically what that is. The actual asset itself, Bitcoin, is just sitting there. Bitcoin does what Bitcoin does, right? One Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. It's not generating anything. And unless you're in the mining business, which is another thing, it has nothing to do with these treasury companies whatsoever, right? Then they are not generating income. So I know I'm repeating myself, all this stuff right now, but that's why it's just an extended take, and I'm just going on and on. So BMNR and MSTR, like they're both treasury companies, but truthfully, as much as I love Bitcoin over I do ETH for the value of it, it does make more sense if you are a trader or a person who's looking at this as like a paper investment to go the ETH route, because again, that's a business model. So with that said, that was a tweet. All this came out from just that one little tweet that basically a Bitcoin's treasury company is like a 2007 investor in undeveloped land. It makes much more sense to invest into an apartment building that is collecting rent than it is to have this undeveloped land, because if you have no intentions of ever selling that undeveloped land, you're just tying up capital, right? So you'll say, oh, well, the Royals never sell their land. Well, yes, that is true. But historically, what do? They lease it out to other lords. They lease it out to people who are going to run businesses and so forth on it. They never sell it, but they're generating income because they're renting it out. So that's an apartment building. So anyone that says, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, the wealthy people do not sell their assets. Absolutely. They do not sell their assets, but they generate income from their assets. So again, unless you figure out how to generate income from Bitcoin while actually keeping it native on chain and not doing any craziness, which would require a Bitcoin upgrade, some sort of major change on the infrastructure of itself, of the chain, it's not the same thing. And on the other side now, ETH is built for that when they switched over the proof of stake. But again, would I actually own either one of these? I said it already, and I'll say it again. No way. I would not hold them. I would much rather sit and hold Bitcoin than I would any of these treasury companies. And then when it comes to ETH even, right, the value of ETH is the network itself. But if you have no intentions of flying, if you don't think anyone's going to fly, then that gas is just sitting there. It's not doing anything because the planes aren't going anywhere. So if you believe that the planes are going to take off, then those futures contracts, that gas, if you will, is going to be more valuable as there's more demand for seats on that plane, right? There's more flights, there's more gas needed, the demand goes up, price goes up. So that's it. Extended takes, land the plane right there. Back to my analogy, landing planes